she took her sister's place to marry a millionaire in a coma. He awoke asking for his real bride. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Rachel Carter never thought she would find herself in such an unusual situation. She had always been the quiet one, the shadow of her beautiful, outgoing older sister, Sophie. While Sophie had a vibrant personality and an equally sparkling social life, Rachel often felt overlooked, as if she were merely a backdrop to Sophie's more glamorous world. Sophie, though, had always been the confident one, until one fateful night, when everything changed. James Hunter, a successful millionaire businessman, had been deeply in love with Sophie. Their engagement was the talk of the town, beautiful, powerful, and unstoppable. But fate had other plans. A car accident left James in a coma, and for weeks, he remained unconscious, drifting between life and death in a hospital bed. His family and friends kept vigil, but there was one person who felt particularly lost during this time, Rachel. The hospital room felt suffocating, the machines beeping with a cold reminder of the life that hung in the balance. It was in those long, quiet hours that Rachel began to feel a stirring inside her. While Sophie, despite being James's fiancée, struggled with her own emotions and fears, Rachel stepped forward. It wasn't her place to make such a bold move, but she felt a responsibility to be there for Sophie, to fill the role that had once been hers. Sophie, who had always been the strong one, now seemed fragile and distant, lost in the uncertainty of her future. So, in a moment of confusion and desperation, Rachel agreed to stand in for her sister. She married James in a small ceremony held at the hospital, with only a few witnesses, including the family and closest friends. The decision felt surreal, like a dream. Rachel had always admired James from a distance but had never truly considered a life with him. However, now, in the face of tragedy, she was taking Sophie's place, becoming his wife, even though her heart was conflicted. She wasn't sure what was real anymore. Would she ever feel like she truly belonged in this world? Rachel, however, couldn't deny the pull she felt toward James, even as he lay unconscious. She found herself spending long hours at his side, talking to him, hoping he could hear her, hoping he could feel her presence. It was the strangest form of love, one built on an illusion, yet strangely powerful. What she didn't know was that, somewhere deep within his coma, James could hear her voice. He could sense her presence, even though he couldn't respond. And the moment he would wake up, he would see her, his bride, but would he see her for who she really was? Or would he mistake her for the woman he had always loved? Rachel's heart raced as she watched the man she had come to care for so deeply lie there, unaware of the choices she had made in his name. Would their story truly begin the way it was meant to? Or would this fragile, twisted beginning be the spark that led to something far more complicated than either of them could have imagined? I know it was a decision Rachel had never expected to make, but it was one she could not take back. She had married James Hunter. She, Rachel Carter, the quiet, shy younger sister, had married the man who was once the love of her sister's life, in a hasty ceremony beside his hospital bed. Rachel had done it for Sophie, but somewhere between the vows and the silence that followed, she had begun to wonder if she was doing this for herself, too. Sophie was in no condition to make such a decision. She was lost in her own confusion, her own guilt. But Rachel felt a deep sense of responsibility, not only as a sister but also as a woman who had spent hours sitting next to a man in a coma, talking to him like he could hear her. She had begun to feel a connection to him, a bond that went deeper than simple sympathy. It was a love that had started as nothing more than a gesture of kindness, but it had blossomed into something far more complicated. The first few days after the ceremony felt like a blur. Rachel stayed by James's side constantly, even though he was still unconscious. She told him everything, about her life, about Sophie, about the overwhelming responsibility she now carried on her shoulders. She wondered if he could hear her. She wondered if the man lying there, hooked up to all those machines, could feel the emotions flooding through her. He was still unconscious, still in the deep coma that had kept him from the world for so long. But Rachel had begun to see signs of something more. Sometimes, when she spoke, his fingers twitched. Sometimes, his face softened, as if he were trying to smile, though it was only a brief flicker of expression. Rachel wanted to believe that it meant something. She wanted to believe that, somehow, James was still there, somewhere beneath the surface. The days turned into weeks, and the hospital room became a second home for Rachel. She found herself growing more and more comfortable in this strange new life. She wasn't Sophie, but she had started to feel like she could be the person James needed. The thought frightened her, yet it also filled her with a strange sense of peace. She had always felt like the lesser of the two sisters, but now she was doing something that no one else could. She was taking care of James. She was honoring her sister's wishes, even though it meant stepping into a role she wasn't sure she was ready for. One evening, as Rachel sat by James's side, holding his hand and talking about her day, she felt a shift. It was subtle, but it was there. She could have sworn she felt his fingers tighten around hers. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this it? Was he waking up? She leaned forward, her heart pounding. But then, just as quickly as the feeling had come, it was gone. James was still unconscious. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had been living in this strange limbo for so long, unsure of what the future would hold. But now, she was beginning to feel a glimmer of hope. Hope that one day, James would wake up, and when he did, everything would change. She just wasn't sure how it would all unfold. Would he remember her? Would he see her as the woman who had stood by his side in his darkest hours? Or would he still only see her as Sophie's sister? Rachel didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had a chance. A chance to not only help James heal, but to heal herself, too. To find out who she was in the process. The days went on, and the tension in the room only grew. The nurses came and went, the machines beeped and whirred, but for Rachel, the world outside of the hospital seemed to fade away. There was only James, lying there, waiting. And Rachel, waiting too, for the moment when everything would shift, when everything would change. She had made her decision. She had chosen to step into a role she never imagined. Now, she would just have to wait and see if it was the right choice, for her, for Sophie, and for James. I don't know how long it had been since I started sitting by his side, Rachel thought as she gazed at James, still lying unconscious in his hospital bed. The days blurred into one another, and time felt like an illusion. The world outside seemed so distant, so far away from this sterile hospital room. Rachel had begun to feel a strange connection to James. She had always respected him from a distance, admired him from afar. He was the kind of man who had everything, money, power, charm, but she never truly understood him. Now, sitting beside him, she began to see a different side. She saw him as more than just the successful businessman. He was a man who had been vulnerable, who had once loved Sophie deeply, and who was now fighting for his life. But there was something else, something that Rachel could not put into words. Something that made her heart race every time she spoke to him. It was the way his hand would occasionally twitch when she touched it, the way his lips would almost form a smile when she talked about mundane things, her favorite books, the weather, her hopes for the future. She wasn't sure if it was just wishful thinking, but it felt like he could hear her, like he was still with her, even though he was so far away. It was a strange kind of intimacy, one that had grown without either of them fully realizing it. She didn't know if James would remember any of these moments when he woke up, or if he would even remember her at all. But she had come to terms with that. The truth was, she didn't just want him to wake up for Sophie's sake. She wanted him to wake up for her. She wanted him to see her for who she was, not just the sister who had stepped into Sophie's shoes but as Rachel, the woman who had stood by him when he was at his most vulnerable. She wasn't sure what would happen when he woke up. Would he remember his life before the accident? Would he recognize her as the woman who had married him in Sophie's place? Or would he still see her as just Sophie's sister, someone who was only meant to play a temporary role? These questions haunted Rachel's every waking moment. But for now, she could do nothing but wait. Then, one afternoon, as the sunlight filtered softly through the hospital blinds, something shifted. Rachel had been talking to James, as she often did, telling him about her day, when she noticed a subtle movement. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then she saw it again, a twitch of his finger, just barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat. Was he waking up? Was this the moment she had been waiting for? Her breath caught in her throat as she leaned closer to him, her hand still holding his. She whispered his name, softly, almost pleadingly. James. There was no response at first. But then, his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, ever so slowly, his eyes began to open. Rachel's heart raced. This was it. He was waking up. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, and now it was happening. His eyes, though still blurry, focused on her. For a moment, there was silence. Rachel held her breath, not knowing what to expect. And then, he spoke, his voice hoarse and weak, but unmistakable. Who are you? The question took Rachel by surprise, and her heart sank. It wasn't the greeting she had imagined. She had expected him to recognize her immediately, to call out her name or at least acknowledge her presence. But instead, he was asking who she was. The man she had grown to care for, the man she had been sitting beside for weeks, didn't even recognize her. A lump formed in her throat. She tried to steady herself, to find the words. James, it's me, she said softly, her voice trembling. It's Rachel. I'm your wife. The confusion in his eyes only deepened. My wife, he repeated slowly, as if the words didn't make sense. Rachel felt a wave of emotions wash over her, relief, fear, and a deep, aching sadness. She had always hoped that when this moment came, it would be different. But this was not what she had imagined. He didn't remember her. He didn't remember their marriage. He didn't remember anything about the life they had shared, even if only for a brief moment. And just like that, the reality of the situation hit her harder than she had expected. James Hunter, the man she had married, didn't even recognize her as his wife. James's gaze was unfocused, his expression still confused as he stared at Rachel. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he tried to piece together a reality that no longer made sense to him. The words she had spoken hung in the air between them, unanswered. I'm your wife, she repeated softly, her heart pounding in her chest. But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure what she meant anymore. How could she be his wife when he didn't even remember her? His hand, which had been gripping hers so tightly just moments before, now lay limp in her grasp. She could feel the coldness in his touch, the distance that seemed to have grown between them in an instant. She had always imagined this moment, when James would finally wake up, but nothing about this felt right. Nothing about this was what she had expected. You're my wife. His voice was weak, hoarse, as if speaking took every bit of energy he had left. But how? What happened? The questions tumbled out, each one a little more desperate than the last. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat as she tried to find the right words. The man she had married, the man she had been caring for, didn't know who she was. She wasn't sure if it was the shock of the accident, the toll the coma had taken on him, or if it was something deeper. Either way, she had no answers. For him. James, she said, her voice trembling slightly, you were in a coma. You were in an accident, and I'm here. I'm here because I promised I would be. She could see the confusion in his eyes only deepen. But I don't remember any of it, he whispered, almost to himself. I don't remember marrying you. I don't remember anything. I don't even remember, his voice trailed off, and for a moment, the room was silent. Rachel fought to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. How could she explain something so complicated, something so fragile, to a man who had lost his memory of the last few months of his life. The bond they had shared during his coma, the quiet moments where she had sat by his side and talked to him, they seemed to have vanished. All of that, all of the love and tenderness she had given him, meant nothing now. At least, not to him. "James," she whispered, "you don't remember because you've been asleep for so long. But I'm still here. I'm still here, and I will help you remember." She wasn't sure if she believed that herself, but it was the only thing she could say. The only thing she could hold on to. James's eyes flickered again, his focus shifting from her face to the unfamiliar hospital room. It was clear that he was still trying to make sense of the world around him. His brow furrowed as he tried to push himself up, but the effort only made him wince in pain. "I don't understand," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did this happen? Why don't I remember anything?" Rachel sat there, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over her. This was not how she had imagined it would be. She had imagined that when he woke up, they would pick up where they left off. She had imagined that everything would fall into place, that he would hold her and smile, and everything would be okay again. But now, that dream felt so far away. She reached out and gently touched his arm. "You don't need to remember everything right now," she said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time." "But I'm here for you, James. I'm not going anywhere." James closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather his thoughts. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and Rachel could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. She wasn't sure what would happen next. Would he ever remember their marriage? Would he ever see her as his wife? Or would he always see her as a stranger? There was so much uncertainty in the air, so much fear about what the future held. But one thing was certain, Rachel was here, and she wasn't going to leave him, no matter what. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. Slowly, James opened his eyes and looked at her again. This time, there was a hint of recognition in his gaze, though it was still clouded with confusion. "I don't know what's going on," he said softly. "But I feel like I should know you. Like I should remember you." Rachel's heart ached at his words. He was trying so hard to piece together the fragments of his life. And maybe, just maybe, he would remember her, Rachel. The woman who had stood by him even when everything seemed impossible. The woman who had married him even though she wasn't sure what that would mean. She squeezed his hand gently, offering him a soft smile. "I know, James," she said quietly. "I know. And I'm here to help you find your way back." James continued to stare at Rachel, his mind clearly wrestling with the confusion that still clouded his thoughts. The room was quiet, the faint beep of the heart monitor the only sound filling the silence. Rachel could feel her heartache as she watched him struggle. She had hoped that when he woke up, there would be a moment of recognition, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. But that moment had not come. And now, she was faced with a man who had no memory of their marriage, no memory of her. "I know this is hard," Rachel said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "but you don't have to remember everything right now. Just take it slow. You'll get there. We'll get there." James closed his eyes, as though processing her words, trying to hold on to whatever fragments of his memory he could. "I don't know what's real anymore," he whispered. "I don't remember anything. Everything feels like a dream." Rachel's throat tightened. She had expected some level of difficulty, but the depth of his confusion was more than she had anticipated. He wasn't just forgetting details, he was questioning everything. He wasn't the man she remembered. "You don't need to remember everything," she repeated gently. "The most important thing right now is that you're awake. You're here." She leaned forward, carefully taking his hand in hers again, offering him whatever comfort she could. He opened his eyes and glanced down at their hands, the contact seeming to ground him for a moment. "You're my wife?" he asked again, his voice still soft and unsure. "Yes," Rachel answered, her voice steady now, though her insides twisted. "I married you, James. You were in a coma, and I stepped in for Sophie. I promised to be here, and I'm not going anywhere. James seemed to absorb her words slowly, processing them, but there was still a distant look in his eyes, like he couldn't fully grasp the reality of what she was telling him. I don't know if I can believe this, he murmured. How did all of this happen? Rachel felt a lump in her throat as she tried to keep her composure. The weight of the situation was heavier than she had imagined. Not only was James struggling with his memory, but he was also trying to piece together a life that felt foreign to him. It's okay, James, she said softly. You don't have to have all the answers right now. I'll help you remember. We can take it slow. Just let me be here with you. There was a long pause as he processed her words. Finally, he looked back at her, a small frown creasing his forehead. I wish I could remember, he said quietly. But I don't even know who I am right now. Everything feels like it's slipping away. Rachel squeezed his hand reassuringly. You're not alone in this. I'm right here. And we're going to figure it out together. James looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find a hint of truth in the midst of the confusion. Finally, he nodded slightly. I don't know how I got here, but I feel like I should trust you. I feel like I should remember you. Rachel's heart swelled with emotion, but she kept her voice calm. You will, James. You'll remember. And until you do, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. It was hard for Rachel to believe her own words, but she said them anyway. She had promised herself that she would stay by his side, no matter how difficult this journey became. James may not remember her now, but she wouldn't give up on him. She wouldn't give up on their marriage, no matter how uncertain the future seemed. There was still hope, and Rachel was determined to hold on to it. She wasn't sure what would happen next, or if James would ever remember the life they had shared before the accident, but she knew one thing for sure: she was not going to leave him. Not now, not ever. Days passed, and slowly, the rhythm of life at the hospital settled into something like routine. Rachel found herself spending long hours at James's side, telling him stories, reading to him, sharing every detail of her day, hoping that somehow, in some way, it would help him remember. Every day, he grew a little stronger, but the memory of his past life, of their life together, remained elusive. There were moments when Rachel thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but they were brief, fleeting moments that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Still, she held on to those moments, as small and fragile as they were. It was a slow, painstaking process, one that often left her feeling exhausted and uncertain, but she refused to give up. She refused to let go of the hope that one day, James would remember her, the real her. Not Sophie's sister, but Rachel, the woman who had married him, the woman who had promised to stand by him no matter what. One afternoon, as she sat by his side, holding his hand and talking to him about a book she had been reading, James turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. Rachel, he said, his voice still hoarse, I keep hearing that name in my mind. I know it's important, but I don't understand why. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was this the moment she had been waiting for? She tried to keep her voice calm, even though the excitement bubbled up inside her. James, you remember my name? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. I think so. But I don't know why I can't. Remember more. Everything else is just a blur. Rachel squeezed his hand gently, trying not to show the overwhelming relief she felt. It's okay, James. You don't have to remember everything right now. The important thing is that you're getting better. That's what matters. James looked at her for a long moment, as if studying her face. But what if I can't remember the rest? He asked quietly. What if I never remember who I was before the accident? Rachel's heart ached at his words. She could see the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty that mirrored her own. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to leave him. James, you will remember, she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. It might take time, but we'll get through this together. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled at him, though her heart was heavy. She wanted so badly for him to remember, but she knew that time was the only thing that would help. I know this is hard, she continued, but we'll take it one day at a time. And in the meantime, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. James looked at her again, his expression softening. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You've been here for me, even when I didn't know who you were. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. You don't need to thank me, James. I made a promise, and I'm keeping it. She didn't say the words aloud, but in her heart, she knew this was her choice. She had chosen to be here, to stay by his side. No matter what came next, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she would not leave him. It didn't matter if he remembered her now or in the future. It didn't matter if he ever remembered their past together. What mattered was the present, and right now, she was here. And she would stay. For as long as it took, Rachel would be there, helping James rebuild his life, piece by piece, even if it meant starting from scratch. Slowly, things were changing. Slowly, they were moving forward. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know how long it would take for James to fully remember or what their future would look like, but she knew that they would face it together. And that was enough, for now. It had been weeks since James had first woken up, and while his memory was still far from complete, Rachel had noticed small changes. He was starting to recognize faces, places, and even some pieces of his life before the accident. Yet, there were still so many gaps, so many moments that felt like they belonged to someone else. He would remember his childhood home, his favorite food, but when it came to their shared past, his and Rachel's marriage, it was like a blank space in his mind. He would often ask about Sophie, his fiancée, and Rachel would gently remind him that she was no longer a part of his life in the same way. Every time, her heart twisted. But she knew it was for the best, and she wasn't about to give up on him. Each day, she found herself more and more invested in helping him rebuild his memories. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but Rachel stayed by his side, never wavering. One afternoon, as the soft light of the setting sun filtered through the window, Rachel found herself sitting by his bed once more, her hand in his. James had been particularly quiet that day, more withdrawn than usual. She could sense his unease, the lingering frustration that came with the feeling of losing parts of himself. James, she said softly, breaking the silence, how are you feeling today? He turned his head to look at her, his eyes tired but still searching, as if trying to pull the right words from somewhere deep inside himself. I don't know, he replied, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. I keep feeling like I should remember more. I should remember you, Rachel. But I don't. The vulnerability in his voice hit Rachel hard. She had been so focused on the little progress he had made, on the glimmers of recognition, that she hadn't fully understood how painful this process was for him. It's okay, James, she said, her voice steady, though her heart ached. You're doing your best, and that's all anyone can ask for. You don't have to remember everything right now. James closed his eyes, a sigh escaping his lips. I feel like I'm failing you, he murmured. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She had never wanted him to feel like he was failing her. She had always known this journey would be hard, but hearing him say that brought a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. James, you're not failing anyone, she said, squeezing his hand tightly. This is hard for both of us, but we're in this together. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not giving up on you. James opened his eyes again, his gaze searching hers. But what if I never remember? What if you've waited all this time and I never remember who I am, who we are? The fear in his eyes mirrored the fear Rachel had been trying to hide. She had worried about that too, the possibility that his memories might never fully return. But she couldn't let him see that fear. She couldn't let him feel like it was hopeless. It doesn't matter, James, she said softly. I'm here because I want to be. I'm here because I love you, and even if you never remember everything, that won't change. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "You really mean that, don't you?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, I do. I've been here every step of the way because I believe in you. And I believe in us." James's expression softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't a memory, not yet. But it was something, a connection, a moment of understanding. "Thank you, Rachel," he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Rachel's smile grew wider, though her heart felt full of emotion she could hardly put into words. "You don't need to thank me, James. You're my husband, and I'm here because I choose to be." In that moment, Rachel realized that it wasn't about the past. It wasn't about the memories they had lost. It was about the present, and the future they could still build together. James may not remember everything, but he was here, and so was she. And that was enough for now. Rachel knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The road ahead was uncertain, but she wasn't afraid. With James by her side, she knew they would find their way. One day at a time. As the weeks passed, James continued to improve, slowly gaining more strength with each passing day. Rachel had been by his side through every step of his recovery, guiding him through the process and offering support when his doubts became overwhelming. Yet, despite the progress, one thing remained unchanged: his memory. The gaps in his mind still persisted, and though he was becoming more comfortable with his surroundings, the past was something that felt out of reach. Every time Rachel spoke of their life together before the accident, there was a look of confusion in his eyes, a blankness that made her heart ache. It wasn't that he didn't want to remember, it was just that he couldn't. Rachel had learned to live with this uncertainty, to focus on the present rather than the past, but it was difficult. Every day, she could see how hard it was for him. The man who had once been confident, self-assured, was now hesitant, unsure of his place in the world. Sometimes, he would ask her about Sophie, wondering if she was still a part of his life. Each time, Rachel had to remind him, gently, that Sophie was no longer in the picture. It was painful, every time, to speak of it. But she knew it was necessary. One morning, as the sun streamed through the hospital window, Rachel sat beside James's bed, holding his hand as she talked to him about the things she had done the day before. It had become part of their routine, her daily updates, no matter how small. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. As she spoke, James suddenly turned to her, his eyes focused, as if trying to make sense of something that had been on his mind. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something. I keep asking myself, why did you marry me?" The question caught Rachel off guard. Her breath hitched in her chest. She had never expected him to ask such a thing, and it made her realize just how much uncertainty still lingered in his mind. "James," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions that stirred inside her, "you were the man I loved. And I still love you. I married you because you were everything I had ever wanted, and even though things are different now, my feelings for you haven't changed." James looked at her for a long moment, his brow furrowed as he tried to understand her words. "But how can you still love me?" he asked, his voice tinged with self-doubt. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. The pain in his voice was more than she could bear. She had known he would struggle with his identity, but hearing him express it so plainly broke something inside her. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "you are the man I married. You may not remember everything, but the person I fell in love with is still there. I believe that." She squeezed his hand, hoping her words would give him the reassurance he needed. For a long time, James remained silent, his eyes cast downward as if lost in thought. Then, slowly, he spoke again. "I don't know if I can ever be the man I was," he said quietly. "But I want to try. For you. For us." Rachel smiled through the tears that welled up in her eyes. "You don't have to be the same person you were," she whispered. "You're enough just as you are." James looked at her, his gaze softening. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Rachel brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her heart swelling with emotion. "I made a promise to you, James," she said softly. "And I'm keeping it." In that moment, Rachel knew that their journey was far from over. They still had so much to face, so many challenges ahead. But she also knew that as long as they were together, they could handle whatever came their way. The road to healing might be long, and the path ahead uncertain, but Rachel was no longer afraid of the unknown. With James by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. Together, they would find their way back to each other, even if it meant starting from the very beginning. It had been months since James had woken up, and though he still struggled with his memory, there were moments when Rachel could see the man she had married returning to her. The road had been long, full of setbacks, doubts, and fear, but through it all, she had never wavered. She had promised him that she would stay, and she kept that promise every single day. Now, as he sat next to her in the quiet of their small apartment, she could see that he was beginning to find his way back to himself, piece by piece. His memories were still scattered, but each time he recalled something new, no matter how small, it felt like a victory. James had started to remember bits of his life before the accident, his favorite music, the places he had traveled, even some of the friends he had once had. But the most important thing, what Rachel had been waiting for, was the moment when he finally remembered their life together. It had taken time, but it had happened. One afternoon, as they sat on the couch, James turned to Rachel with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice more confident than it had been in weeks. "About us. About our life together." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She could see that he was trying to find the words, as if weighing his feelings. "I remember now," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "I remember how we met, how we fell in love. I remember marrying you." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, James had spoken about their shared past, without hesitation, without confusion. It wasn't just a piece of the puzzle, it was a breakthrough. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I've waited so long for you to say that." He smiled, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. "I know I haven't been the man I used to be, but I'm trying. I want to be the man you remember. The man I was before." Rachel reached out, taking his hand in hers, her fingers gently brushing against his skin. "You don't have to be that man, James. You don't have to be who you were. You're enough just as you are. I've always loved you, and I always will." He squeezed her hand in return, the warmth of his touch a quiet promise. "I'm not sure I'll ever be the same person I was before the accident," he said, his voice soft, but firm. "But I'm here. And I want to be here with you. For the rest of our lives." Rachel's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and joy. They still had so much to learn about each other, so much to rebuild, but she knew that this moment was the beginning of something new. They didn't need to go back to what they had before. They could start again, together. The past would always be a part of their story, but it no longer defined them. What mattered now was the future they were going to build together, one step at a time. As James pulled her into a gentle embrace, Rachel closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. It had been a long journey, filled with uncertainty and heartache, but they had made it through. And now, as they sat together, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it as partners. There was no going back to what had been, but they had each other, and that was all they needed. Together, they would build a life full of new memories, a life full of love, and the promise of a future that was theirs to shape. In that moment, Rachel realized that their journey wasn't about finding their way back to what they had lost, it was about moving forward, together, into the life they were meant to have. In this heartfelt tale of love, memory loss, and personal growth, we follow a woman who marries a millionaire in a coma, only for him to awaken and forget everything, including her. As the story unfolds, the couple navigates the complicated emotional journey of rebuilding their relationship. Rachel, the woman who stepped in for her sister, Sophie, to marry the millionaire, James, must balance her loyalty to her family with her growing love for a man who doesn't remember their shared past. As time passes, James begins to regain his memory, but the road to recovery is filled with emotional challenges, including painful moments when he struggles to remember who she is. This compelling story explores themes of identity, love, and the healing power of time, all set against the backdrop of a millionaire's world. As James remembers more about his life, Rachel remains by his side, supporting him through every moment of doubt and uncertainty. The story highlights the struggles and triumphs of those who must rebuild their lives after a life-altering event, a theme often seen in many millionaire stories. With each passing day, James starts to remember the love they once shared, though not without facing his fears and doubts. Together, they rebuild their relationship, learning that love is not just about the past but about what they are willing to build together moving forward. This touching narrative is a perfect example of how love can endure even in the face of immense challenges, making it one of the most compelling millionaire stories. It's a reminder that no matter how difficult life may get, true love can help heal even the deepest wounds, a theme that resonates with many who enjoy millionaire stories. As Rachel and James face the unknown, they are proof that love, patience, and perseverance can create new beginnings even after the hardest of times. This story, with its emotional depth and heartfelt moments, is a testament to the enduring power of love, and it proves that sometimes, the most unexpected journeys are the ones that lead to the greatest rewards in life, much like many of the best millionaire stories.